And welcome to the SpartanMag.com VCast. Jim Comparoni, Paul Konyndyk. Michigan State continued to practice today, not in full pads today, coming off of Saturday's scrimmage. We spoke with head coach Jonathan Smith and several players today, a couple of players. We heard about several players that are making progress, so we got a little more information about some of the progress that's being made. We're not able to watch the scrimmage, but we're kind of trying to piece together some of the things that happened. We'll talk about some of those names that made some plays on Saturday, and also some depth chart particulars as they piece together heading toward the opener August 30th, I think it is. 2 weeks from Friday, I think, something like that, against Florida Atlantic, Spartan Stadium Friday night. That's going to be an interesting game. Not the easiest game. Florida Atlantic's a team that played Illinois within 7 points last year, and Herman is getting a second or third year established. They'll be better than they were last year. Remains to be seen what Michigan State has. But today with Jonathan Smith, the things that he was talking about, tight ends coach Wozniak, your takeaways from what we learned today.
Well, first off, good news on the injury front. I know there's some concern on our message board about wide receiver being injured, and Montorie Foster wasn't at practice today, and that's a guy that they've got to have out there, a leading receiver. And we learned today that he is a little bit dinged up, but nothing serious. And Jonathan Smith indicated, without being asked, that Montorie Foster, wasn't out there and that he'll be back soon. And he also indicated that there's nothing long-term facing anybody coming out of that scrimmage. So good news on the injury front for Michigan State, and that would have kind of changed the entire trajectory of the season. Not that they don't have a couple good young receivers that can help out. Nick Marsh is a guy. They've got other pieces as well, but to not have Montorie Foster, that would have been a big blow, maybe on the level of like losing a Nate Carter or something like that.
Right, and we didn't know that coming in. We had heard some things about an injury, but Smith brought it up, you said, without being asked, and said nothing long term. So
and then at practice today, I noticed that he wasn't repping out there. Now that's something I can't go out on the message boards and say, hey, Montorie Foster's not repping, because we're not there to look at the injury report.
We're not allowed to.
We're not allowed to report on that. But
if we did, media wouldn't be allowed back. So if we see somebody with a boot on their knee, we can't really report it. That's just one of the deals here.
Right. So Montorie Foster didn't practice today. Smith indicated that, and it vibes with what we saw. But the fact that he's going to be back pretty soon is really good news. And today was, I think, a really kind of a good day for Michigan State, at least for us, because we got to kind of dig in and into the weeds a little bit and find out some names. But also, this is usually, like in a first-year program, is different than maybe a second or third year or fourth year, because usually coming out of that first scrimmage, you start getting into those dog days type thing. And to me, I think there's an energy and a sense of urgency, exuded by Smith and, even some of the players and coaches, that they want to get work done and keep on getting work done because they like the direction they're going, and they kind of want to be the best version of themselves by the time the season rolls around and they're running out of time.
Exactly right. Running out of time, and you get that log jam, that urgency when you're a head coach like Jonathan Smith, knowing that a lot of things need to be done. Seems like a lot of things are on schedule, but no coach ever thinks everything is, all the screws are tightened. One thing that I heard that was positive is it sounds like there were not a lot of communication problems on defense.
That's surprising.
That's a good step for Michigan State defense from what we've seen in recent years. Defense, I asked Jonathan Smith if he expects the defense to be ahead of the offense at this stage of camp, and if so, is that a good thing? And he said yes, it usually should be. And there goes Jackson Kohler going to class on a scooter. Is that newsworthy?
No.
It's good to see him out here going to class, Paul.
Okay. They have to go to class. Maybe not
everywhere.
Not every school, but they do here. And
I brought it up because I knew that where the camera was, they'd see him go.
You know what's newsworthy? Once Jackson Kohler hits a jump hook with both hands when he's got someone guarding him.
I'm not sure I've ever seen someone 6'9" or 6'10" on a scooter. So that was interesting. Anyway, communication seemed to be sharp on defense. So that's newsworthy coming out of camp, in my opinion. And yes, defense a little bit ahead. That's what they expect. So everything is on schedule there. So, Michigan State, they've got some maturity in that defensive backfield. Maybe they've not played together cohesively as a unit, but you've got some players coming back that have starting experience, whether it's Chance Rucker, last year's a true freshman starting, Dylan Tatum starting in the past out of necessity, maybe out of position, now moving to safety. Malik Spencer been locked in there at safety for more than a year, although he played some slot in 2 games last year. Then you have Nikai Martinez coming in from Central Florida. We heard, Darius Snow, I think it was, pointing him out as a guy that's impressed him about making some plays. And then Ed Woods coming in as a starting corner from Arizona State. There's some maturity and some proven football people back there. I'm intrigued to see what that looks like collectively. Blue Adams and Demetrius Martin working together as coaches for the first time. There's some pieces there, but one step at a time. Communication on defense as a whole sounded like it was pieced together for scrimmage number 1.
We've been talking about the different pieces they have for a long time, for several years. And I think, they've got some veteran pieces, and you just listed off all those guys. But I think when it comes to not having miscommunications in a scrimmage, that's less the pieces and more of the operation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, if Michigan State's going to be, get back to being a good defense, it's going to have to be operationally sound. And it hasn't been for several years. So it doesn't matter how many pieces you have. Yeah, that gets you in position to make plays when everything works out. But just to be functionally tied together is something that's big. And it doesn't matter how many veterans you have in the field for this first scrimmage. If there's not good communication, then the offense is going to make plays. And to tell you the truth, there's a lot of weapons on this Michigan State offense that can make plays. Like the number of things that tight ends can do to linebackers, for instance. Mm-hmm. If you don't have good communication, if you don't have a tied together unit, things are going to spring a leak, and they didn't on Saturday. And I think that's really, going back to the good news aspect, the fact that they're functionally tied together, the attention to detail on defense, the fact that you've got a guy like Brady Pretzlaff as a true freshman making plays with presumably the threes, as well as guys making plays with the ones. I think that's when you get back to operation. It's can you go from ones to twos to threes and still have a cohesive unit? It looks like they're taking steps in that direction now. Jonathan Smith was the first one to say that they're not all the way there, and no one's going to admit that they are. Mm-hmm. But the coordination, the attention to detail, the effort, energy. Joe Rossi's got, he does a lot of those things, or emphasizes a lot of those things, and playing football the right way. And it sounds like guys are doing a nice job. It helps when you have veteran linebackers. It helps when you have 4 or 5 guys that can come in there and kind of lead that defense. But that's not the be-all, end-all. You've got young guys with the threes. They're making plays. So it takes a lot of coordination, and it's good to see that everything's tied together and not 3 different units working separately of each other.
Sure. You mentioned Pretzlaff. You touched on that. We'll talk about that in a minute. First of all, give us a like here on this channel. Subscribe to the channel. We'd appreciate that. Also want to let you know, did you know that just a few years ago, the state of Michigan ranked first in the nation for deposit container recycling? 90% of all purchased bottles and cans were being redeemed for their deposits. Today, only 73% are being redeemed. That means Michiganders are forfeiting $105 million. That's $105 million every year in bottle and can deposits that are not being redeemed. If that's not bad enough, this deficit is also having a negative impact on the environment, with tons of recyclable materials ending up in landfills. Michigan's deposit system creates the cleanest recycling material for the beverage industry to make new cans and new bottles, and it reduces the environmental impact of creating new cans and new bottles. When Michigan's recycling rate drops, it hurts the environment, it hurts industry, it hurts all of us. Help the environment, help yourself, help the state, take them back. Help your lakes, your roads. They're your lakes, they're your roads, they are your beaches, and it's your dime. So take them back. It's worth your time, and everyone will benefit. Take them back. A message from Shupan, a great company dedicated to recycling and to the Michigan State Spartans. So take your bottles back. We want to continue with that support of that campaign. Pretzlaff. Interception. Snow said it was the first play of the scrimmage. You and I talked about it before Darius Snow came out.
I think he said it was his first play.
His first play.
Yeah,
good.
So that's
you.
my take on that.
Thank you. So, the way they did scrimmages in the spring showcase, and the way a lot of teams do it, but the way they did it, I'm guessing that was 3s versus 3s.
Right.
So I don't think that was Childs or Schuster throwing an interception, but Pretzlaff, Darius Snow mentioned, had an interception. He was proud of Pretzlaff doing that.
Just a linebacker, a guy from where he came from, up in Gaylord. I know they've got a good football team. They did some really good things up there, but having a linebacker making plays in coverage as a true freshman, that's a big deal.
You think we'll see any time this season if Michigan State gets a comfortable lead or something? I don't know. They've got more depth at inside linebacker now, but Drew Milliken got on the field a little bit last year against Penn State. if they get into a situation where you've got Gaylord and Grayling as your two inside linebackers?
Yeah, I don't know. That'd be pretty interesting. You're
Could
going up
happen.
there soon.
Could happen. Anyway, other names that were mentioned today: Nikai Martinez, the transfer from Central Florida. Teammates mentioned him. Tight ends was an area of emphasis today in terms of interview opportunities. Wozniak came out, the tight ends coach. Jack Velling came out and spoke. And we continue to hear good things about Michael Masunas. Was a redshirt sophomore now from, I think, Surprise, Arizona. Redshirted his first year, was injured last year, was a surprise player in the spring. That's what Wozniak told us then, and repeated that again today. Said he was frankly surprised because they had no film on him because he hadn't been on the practice field. Looked pretty good in the spring. He's looking even better now, Paul. We're hearing good things about Masunas.
Yeah, I'm glad Wozniak came out because I was watching tight ends today because there's a lot of NFL guys at practice today. There's probably about 12 to 15 NFL coaches out there, and they're keeping a close eye on tight ends. No surprise there because of the way Michigan State uses tight ends, and they've been NFL friendly with their tight ends in the past. But so I'm watching the NFL guys watch the tight ends, and they're watching, obviously, they're watching Velling, but they're also watching Masunas, and he was standing out to me. I'm like, okay, I had to do a double take and just verify because the roster is so new. I'm like, okay, 81, I think it's Masunas, and sure enough, I mean, he looks good physically, and we hear a lot of good stuff about him. Like Wozniak was raving about his intelligence, that he gets it, that he understands things, that he asks good questions, that he's good with his routes. He runs the right routes at the right depths. He catches the ball well. Blocking, it's about Velling being a blocker because he's been in this offense. But Masunas seems to have wants to be a willing blocker, and has been impressive. And then you talk to Darius Snow. He mentioned about Masunas, about how he's a guy that when you feel like you've got really good coverage on him, and he still makes plays. And that's kind of like, I'm glad Darius Snow said that because a lot of times you see guys with tight ends, and once they get in games, they can be making plays in practice, but once they get in games and they're covered up, I'm thinking of some guys that over the years that have been NFL guys, at least had a cup of coffee there. Sometimes they struggle initially when they get on the field in a tight end role when they have someone covering them. And the fact that Masunas is running good routes, but he also has the concentration when covered to make plays that speaks volumes. But, head coach Jonathan Smith mentioned Masunas today as well.
Yeah.
So there's that's like everybody is mentioning Masunas, and I got to say, like when I was watching tight end reps, besides Velling, who you expect to be really good, Masunas looked really smooth. He looks big and strong and very capable out there. And the other guy at tight end that I think continues to shock me because I think he's taken other steps is Adam Olafale, who really, when he signed here, had no business signing here. And that's the straight, God honest truth. I give him a lot of credit for the work that he put in the weight room, the work that he put in the film room, and I give Michigan State coaches a lot of credit. It speaks volumes about Brian Wozniak and what he's all about, the fact that Adam Olafale continues not just to be a guy that can be a big receiver, but to be a guy that can be functional beyond catching the football in space, and made big strides in the spring, but continue to hear about him as a potential number 3 guy, and maybe that's not going to happen because Parashek is there too. But all of a sudden you've got 4 big body tight ends, and that's a wealth of riches. And man, this program deserves to have good tight ends after all the years of maybe, should, could have, would have.
Using punters and kickers at tight end, walking on punters and kickers.
Some of those guys weren't bad. I mean, some of those guys weren't bad.
Tyler Hunt, Everett Morris did what they could.
But I honestly think that Tyler Hunt would have been really good with this coaching staff. I don't think it's just I don't think it's just the body types. You had a Malik Carr there who had the body type. He should have been good. He was terrible. He was terrible at what he needed to be good at for this team to be successful, and he was selfish as well with the way he played football.
He had some nice plays here and there.
He had some nice plays, but he was selfish. He didn't make the blocks when he needed to, when the team needed a yard. And I don't care how many good plays you make downfield. If you continue to Cadillac and not do the right thing when you need a 1-yard pickup, you're not a tight end. And there's a reason he's not in this program. But they've got guys that have heavy buy-in right now. And this program deserves that because if they're going to get back to running the football, they need tight ends to block well. And I think they're going to get that.
Yeah.
And we don't need to make excuses for these guys anymore.
Yeah, tight end position might be the most improved position on the team.
For sure.
When you look at Carr last year and Evan Morris, Morris is a guy that was a former walk-on kickoff specialist, worked his way up into a role, and he was functional. but he wasn't retained either. He's transferred to Central Florida. Good luck to him. He did a good, solid, put in some time, put in some work, gave it his best. Jack Nickel transferred out. Of course, you have Jack Velling coming in, second-team All-Pac-12 last year. Going to be one of the better tight ends in the Big Ten, and there's some good ones in the Big Ten. Velling, and you mentioned Masunis, a surprise. Parachek, a player on the rise. When we talked to Lindgren and Jonathan Smith last week, their eyebrows raised when they talk about Parachek. And, of course, like you said, Ademola Fileye, a big surprise there as well. A lot different than wondering what you were going to get last year from Morris. And Parachek, didn't get on the field till later as a true freshman, was dinged up a little bit. And who's the other guy that you're talking about, Malik? What's his name? Malik
Carr last year.
Carr, yeah.
But
it was hard to project what he was going to be from week to week. Tight end's going to be a plus this year.
Well, I could project what he's going to be from week to week. He's going to be selfish. If you don't go and throw a body in there to block, that's what he's going to be from week to week. A guy that sucks at run blocking. And you go back to Daniel Barker the year before. You go back to the whole operation. And
it was loose. It was really loose at tight end.
What they've done in a short period of time. I'm really shocked at how. Even just watching those guys go about their business in practice, they just look the part. And Wozniak, kudos to him, kudos to this program, and I don't think I don't think it's as hard as it was for the last 4 years as they made it. There were some bodies. You talk about those other guys that transferred out. I'd be curious to see what those guys could have done had they had good coaching, had they had accountability for 4 years. I don't know.
Well, Nickel, they took a look at Nickel in the spring, and he moved on. So they've done some, they've looked around and they've whittled it down. They've got they've kept Fileye here, which was interesting. He's added some strength. He's a lot different than he was 12 months ago, and credit to him. And he is 6'7". Right. He's always looked good in the airport. Now he looks even better in the airport because he's added that bulk, and that's going to be interesting to watch. Jonathan Smith was talking about some of the competitions: inside linebacker, in the defensive backfield. Offensive line players moving around from position to position. I think I mentioned that Masunis is from Surprise, Arizona. He might be from Tucson. Gavin Brocious might be from Surprise, Arizona. I get them mixed up.
He went to the same high school as Brian Lewerke, didn't he? He went to Chandler?
I don't think so.
I thought he did.
Anyway.
I know he's from Arizona.
Yeah. Rakeem Johnson is a guy that was mentioned. We talked about him last week, true freshman from Idaho. And Smith mentioned him today, or was it Wozniak? But they both might have mentioned him.
Smith mentioned Rakeem Johnson, and that's really significant because we're talking about him being athletic. But one of the things that Smith was talking about is how quickly he's picked up the scheme, and at a
couple of positions. He was playing some center today, I think.
Right. So like when we saw him in the first practice or I think it might have been I don't know if we were in pads yet or not, but he was getting lit up pretty good by Mahalchuk for not his first step, but his second step. And to see him now being talked about as a guy that's making some serious progress, that's a good sign. But anytime someone shouts out a true freshman offensive lineman and does it as frequently as we've heard, that bodes really well for the future.
That's rare, and what we said about his film was it's rare. I know it was Idaho. The competition might not have been the best, but like I said last week, the frame of reference, I'm going to learn something about football because I've not seen someone like him. We'll see what it becomes, and then someday I'll say, yeah, that reminds me of Rakeem Johnson. Right now, nobody reminds me of him. I'm not saying that guarantee he's going to be great or anything. It's just different. And now we're hearing that he's a step ahead a little bit as far as a true freshman goes in the offensive line. So good for him. And that's a guy that wasn't here in the spring. He just arrived. Right. So that's certainly interesting. Also, you mentioned, Montori Foster. Good news that's short term. Nick Marsh made a couple plays in the spring scrimmage. Smith said that, and he said, you guys know that. You guys know about Nick Marsh, which when you stop and think about it, that's a true freshman, right. And it's already old hat that he's going to be making plays.
Right. So that bodes well for him as well. The other guy that I thought needs to be talked about is Mike Sean Beeler, defensive lineman from Chicago. But he's a guy that stood out to me, and I posted about this on the message board the other day. For a freshman, he just looks a little bit different. He plays lower. He has his hands in the right spot, and I don't know how much really quality coaching he's gotten, but he seemed to have. I told you this before interviews today, like natural balance. Like not a lot of guys play low at that size, at that age, and not a lot of guys have that kind of balance and explosiveness. And when he was doing some drills the other day, he was getting some praise as a true freshman, and that's really good news for Michigan State. because he was mentioned by Wozniak as a guy that's really impressive. I think the paraphrase what Wozniak said was, not a guy that we go up against every day, meaning he plays on the interior defensive line, but Michigan State needs developmental growth on the interior defensive line. It's critical. It was neglected by the former staff, and to hear that guy getting praised that highly this early is really good news for Michigan State, because they're not gonna blow him up and talk about him glowingly this early if he's not making some really big plays in practice or really impressive.
Yeah, I asked Brian Wozniak, the tight ends coach, players on the other side of the line of scrimmage, defensive players that have caught his eye, and he mentioned Mike Schonbeeler. Like you said, defensive tackle, they don't match up against him, but he said he's an utter monster. An utter monster. That's a strong quote.
And this is coming
Again,
from a guy
true
that
freshman who just enrolled, who just got here. These are his first practices. He's 282 pounds now. Last year when you looked at his huddle film as a defensive end, he was around 240. And, we were doing stories on him when he committed, and he'd gotten up to 260, and we assumed, he's listed as a defensive end on the recruiting sites, but no, probably defensive tackle. Now we know for sure he's defensive tackle at 283. He's going to get bigger, an utter monster at this point. That's an 11th hour commitment from Chicago Simeon, and that looks like an evaluation that is ahead of schedule. It looks like it's, you never know for sure, but it looks like a hit at this point. That's more good news.
When you think about it, Michigan State, over the years, the guys that have been over success stories to me, like out of the Illinois, it's like the guys that are ranked in the 29s or 30s that people kind of miss on. We've seen it a bunch of times over the years, but to get a defensive tackle out of Illinois after just completely neglecting the defensive tackle position for so long, and you think about, I can maybe think about 5 or 6 guys over the 20 years that we've been working together. The interior defensive linemen that got praised very highly as true freshmen.
I tell you,
unsolicited in terms of you're not saying, hey, how does Micah Schonbeeler look? And so this is a guy that that Wozniak singled out. So he must really really like what he's seen. And this is not a staff that's prone to blowing smoke. These guys have been Spartan with their compliments this training camp. So I put some stock into it with what they're saying, and because I don't think they're a staff that's about hyping guys up that don't deserve it.
And it's a good sign not only for Beeler, but also a position, arguably the hardest position to recruit in the country, defensive tackle. The evaluation looks like it's on for now, but also a guy from Chicago. Hey, Illinois produces defensive linemen.
It does, for
and,
sure.
There's been some players coming through Illinois in the last 20 years that have been overrated for various reasons. But defensive linemen, going back to the Panaschuks and Mallory and the people that have been here, there have been some good ones. And elsewhere, I'm intrigued for Coach Langi Sueanoa to get into Illinois, which he's never really recruited a whole lot, and sift through some defensive linemen there. I think there's a lot of potential there. And Chad Wilt getting there as well. Chad Wilt is recruited for Minnesota and for Indiana. I don't know if Illinois is one of his primary positions, but there are defensive linemen in Illinois, the Chicagoland area. Beeler's the latest. 2.5-star recruit, maybe something like that. I don't know what he was.
But he's a Simeon guy, right?
Yes.
And Simeon, I know this because Simeon came up and played the high school where my kids go to school a couple of years ago, and it's obviously Simeon basketball is one of the best programs in the Midwest. They put out talent every year, but Simeon football doesn't have the same type of reputation. They've been a perennial maybe 500 team, and but when you get a guy out of those kind of schools. Or a school that maybe hasn't had a ton of success. When you get a guy out of Chicago that has success, Chicago coaches take notice, and they tend to be willing to give you more and more guys. And so keep an eye on Micah Schonbeeler.
That includes the private schools, the
absolutely.
Suburban schools. There's players.
It's kind of like
D-linemen there.
It's kind of like Ohio. When a Jarrell Worthy comes out of Ohio and has the kind of success that he had at Michigan State, you can go back in Ohio and get more and more guys. And a guy like Beeler not only is a position of absolute need, absolutely critically important position for Michigan State football, but he could be a foundational player in terms of opening the door for other guys to come out of Chicago.
So a lot of positive there. A lot of third string new player developmental positives we're hearing. Not hearing, Childs, I guess, played pretty well, but the defense was ahead, which shouldn't shock anybody. It's going to take time for Childs. It's going to be his first year as a starter, sophomore. Going to have some patience with him. He's not going to be great right out of the chute. He's going to do some impressive things here and there, but the operational thing, we'll have to wait and see where that is when they play Florida Atlantic, which is going to be a competitive game. Anything else that we learned today?
The other thing Smith was saying is that, like when you talk about Joe Rossi and the scheme, they change things up. So, so Childs is getting to see a lot of new things, and, they take it serious. It's not just going through the motions.
All right. For Paul Konyndyk, my name is Jim Comparoni. I've been watching the VCast from East Lansing with the Spartans for SpartanMag.com.